What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Sylvaine in the quarantine zone. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. So, the last time we did a written interview, we were talking about, Adam's Line coming undone and everything like that. But earlier this year, you released that split EP you did with Unrequited, Time Without End. Could that almost serve as like maybe a clear representation of what maybe the follow up to Adam's Line coming undone will sound like in a way?
Well, after I had made Adams, I kind of had decided in my mind, and I even said in a couple interviews that I wanted to make a split. That I wanted to make an EP, sorry, and I was thinking of doing like a more acoustic, stripped back version of Sylvaine for that EP. And actually, Billy from Unrecorded came along, and that ended up turning into the split EP that we did together. So I kind of had a few tracks that I wanted to use for this one, and actually after that I ended up not going back to the same kind of sound as Adams, but I would say that the next one is going to be, I don't like this word, but I want to use the word epic, because it's turning into being very long songs, lots of tracks, very dramatic in a way. At least certain tracks are. So it's pretty much the opposite, I think, of the split EP.
Okay, that's interesting to put it. When it comes to making the music, do you almost have a preconceived idea of what you want it to sound like, or do things kind of happen organically and things kind of in a way happen by accident?
I would definitely say that it's very spontaneous, because the way I compose, I've always tried to keep this spontaneity alive, because I believe that when I start to analyze too much, it can lose a bit of the authenticity to it. So I do obviously rework my songs a lot, especially the structures and everything like this, but otherwise I try to keep it spontaneous. So sometimes I'll have an idea of what I would like to express for the next record, but in general it seems to happen fairly organically, and I'm just kind of along for the ride, sort of.
That's interesting. Do you find it maybe when you're reworking something or editing something, and the longer you work on something, the harder it is to kind of maintain a moment in the songs in a way?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, of course. Composing in general is seen as this very romantic process, but I have to say that for me it tends to be maybe 10% of that actually romantic, super creative, something just came out of my mind thing, and 90% hard work and trying to figure stuff out and reworking things. So yeah, it is difficult to keep that the spirit of the first spark kind of alive, but I think it's totally possible to do. It's just at some point, you have to draw a line, and you have to be a bit realistic about what you're doing and being kind of objective with yourself.
Of course.
Not to go too far into this, reworking one song for 10 years kind of thing.
Yeah. When it comes to getting inspired to write, do you almost kind of need to put yourself in a certain atmosphere or in a certain element in order for ideas to come through, or do sometimes ideas just come out of nowhere?
Well, that depends. Actually, I usually... I have many really random recordings on my phone of me just at a bus station somewhere recording a melody that happened to just drop into my mind, or I have this document on my phone with all kinds of tons of just sentences that I've thought of that are beginnings of lyric ideas and stuff. But otherwise, I would say the only thing that I see now, after entering the fourth album process, that the only thing I really need to create is a bit of calm around me. So not in the sense that I need a calm place just being in the middle of nowhere, but more in the sense that if I have too much other things going on in my life at the moment, be it working on little projects with Sylvaine, other things, personal stuff, whatever, it's actually really hard for me to allow those gates to open, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Is there ever a time where maybe a lyrical concept or a story could determine the outcome of the music? Do you ever work off of that route in a way, or do you need music before maybe lyrics or a story could come in?
Well, I mean, it's kind of weird when I think about it, because I have always liked writing lyrics, actually, but the thing about Sylvaine is I created this project to kind of put concepts and thoughts and struggles that I have into music, because I do really, really struggle putting them into words. So I would say that most of the time it's the music that comes first, and then I have to try to put it into words what I want to express with the music, which is often quite challenging, because, as I said, it's subjects and things within me that I find hard to talk about. So it's a bit weird to try to put words onto them.
Yeah, and you mentioned on the email interview that we did that there are no rules when creating music, which I agree with 100%. So it's fair to say you like to experiment with many different sounds and many different stories. You don't try to have a one signature sound to evolve your whole career around, right?
No, it's once again, it's quite spontaneous, and I was actually I went to the university here in Oslo to study musicology, and during that time I had a few classes that involved around improv, like improv and music, maybe more jazz oriented, but still, it really opened this universe to me, just experimenting with every little thing you can, and just really. Testing out new things with your voice, with the guitar. I really like using both my voice. I like using my own voice as an instrument, like a keyboard kind of thing, so I like to layer it a lot. With the guitar, I love to use it as some kind of soundscape board, so I'm beating on it with all kinds of stuff and doing all kinds of weird things. So obviously I would say that there is a sound that you can probably find in all the Sylvaine releases, but I have a few pedals that I always come back to, for example, for the effects of the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I'm definitely really open to try new things, and I always love to work with textures. That's probably my favorite thing in music, is to work with layers and textures and, this ambience. So, yeah.
That's definitely, I love how you mentioned the term layers, because that was when I was analyzing Adam's Line Coming Undone, that was the first thing I thought of. There's a lot of layering and there's a lot of contrast into this particular album. So I'm really glad you used that terminology as well.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, but taking classes in improv, that sounds like a little... for lack of better words, almost contradicting, right? Because improv, everything happens organically and spontaneously, but I didn't know that there was a certain there's a right way to do improv, if I guess is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I probably should have specified that it was improvisation music-wise, so it wasn't improv acting, but improv music-wise, and there's, as you say, it's supposed to be something that happens organically, but at the same time, it's kind of a little bit the feeling I get from jazz music, that you have to know the rules before you break them, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, in those classes, it was obviously everything was free, there was nothing that was set, but at the same time, you have things that are right and wrong. If you're improvising over, let's say, a person playing piano or someone playing saxophone or something, if you go completely off-key for any length of long time, it will sound very peculiar.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you have right and wrong.
Yeah, I like that term peculiar. We censored that on how bad it. When you look at the entirety of your catalog, whether it was collaborating with other artists or the Wistful album or Adam's Line Coming Undone or even this recent EP that you did, is it almost kind of like a self-portrait, like a representation of who you are at that particular time?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better myself. That's exactly what it is. So it can be difficult sometimes to look back and to accept things for what they were, because that's exactly what it is. It's a representation of who I was in those periods. Because obviously for each album I'm growing as a person in all directions. So yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like an audio diary that I like to call it.
An audio diary. That's interesting, because I've noticed because especially with Adam's Line, you have a song like Worlds Collide that has a very different vibe from a song like Severance, which is very different from a song like Adam's Line Coming Undone. We kind of touched upon it before, but it seems like you're trying to capture a moment. These are representative of what you were feeling at that particular time in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess you can kind of compare it to taking a still picture of a moment in time, and then you put it together to make an photo album. It's kind of similar, I guess, to that.
Mm-hmm. Now, being that the music is a self-portrait, like you said, and it's a direct extension of yourself, but is there a moment where you're writing something and it's just a complete separation from who you are? Has music ever been a means of escape as well?
Well, it is definitely a means of escape, but I feel like it's more through a cathartic process. It functions more as a release, more than, escape through release, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But my own music, obviously, because it is a cathartic process. It's kind of audio therapy in a way, for many other artists. It's kind of the opposite. It's when you have to really face those things that you might not want to face, or you deal with the issues that you've spent so many years burying, or the things that you can't deal with, that you can't speak about in everyday life.
Yeah, and like when you like re-execute them, like if you're playing it live or something like that, or you're practicing it, is it almost kind of like almost like time travel? You're revisiting that moment at that particular time.
Yeah, it totally is, and for some of the songs, it's proving to be really challenging for me to revisit the content. Like the last track on the Adams album, "L'appel de vide," it's one of those songs that even when I'm practicing at home, like sometimes it just brings me to tears because I remember all the. I mean, that sounds really dramatic, but bear with me. It's all the like pain and frustration that went into that track. So every time I play it on stage, which hasn't happened very much, because I just can't really handle it, I just break down because it just brings me right back to that moment that I found the riff, found the song, and yeah, it's really personal.
Yeah, it almost seems like you have a background in theory, you have like all the tools you need to make music, but it almost seems like strength is also just as important as well, right?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you almost, this might be kind of a silly question, but like, do you almost kind of like portray a character in a way in your albums? Because I really love like, not even just like the music itself, but the presentation of it and like every photo shoot that you release that I've received by, do you almost kind of like portray somebody else outside of who you personally are too?
That's a really good question. It was like, I think that's literally the first time anyone asked me that. So obviously, I think like you say, the visual representation usually starts with the artwork of the actual record because that usually the ideas for that usually manifest quite early on when I have. Sometimes even before the album is completely done, but at least when I have all the demos, I usually take like a walk in the forest or something like that, and then I get the ideas for the actual visual artwork. And the characters, if you can call them, and the promotional pictures that I take. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm not trying to portray someone outside of me, I wouldn't say, because I try to keep it rather personal because I feel that's the only way I can do it because the whole project is so incredibly personal that it would be weird to try to create a character related to it. But of course, that being said, even artists in that kind of situation, they always have some kind of character on stage or that's not completely like everyday life. So for me, I really try to just I really try to portray in my promo pictures the same emotions that I get from the music while listening to the record and what I see in the artwork, like the CD cover, the layout, and everything like that. Yeah. So that kind of dictates it, and also actually the lyrical context kind of dictates what I end up with for the promotional pictures, yes. Even if it's not really a character, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's almost fair to say you have like a vision of what the visual of this album, because I've always said music it's for all five senses. It creates sights, it creates smells, it creates many different emotions and atmospheres and feelings. Like it almost seems like when the album is done, you have like a vision of how you want to present it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a really good way to put. I mean, that's how it should be, anyways. I think it should be like, it should take you and immerse you enough into the world that you really feel all these things. You see things, you hear things, you smell things, everything. And yeah, absolutely. When I'm working on the music, the visuals are so important for me in general. I'm really inspired by visual things, by art, paintings, illustrators, everything. So it's really a natural part of the musical process. Even when I'm starting working on songs, I often have colors. Like I often see colors when I'm writing.
You have synesthesia?
So, yeah, I guess that's what it's called. I just like learned about that a few years ago, and I believe that's what I have because every song for me has a color. Like for example, the title track "Adam's Line Coming Undone." When I was making that song, I was like, "This is so red." Which is why I was like, okay, maybe we can use that in the artwork. And then the wonderful duo 40 Femme made me this beautiful piece for the album. And they started including this red color as a contrast to the black and white. So it was really, really, really perfect.
That's incredible. And kind of going back to the personal element that you portray in your music, like at the end though, you are putting your artwork for other people to experience. And you've mentioned that the music is open to interpretation in a way. But if somebody else were to get a completely different emotion or a completely different interpretation than what you're expressing, could that almost change your perspective on how you look at the music in a way?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting when you have other people's take on it, because obviously everyone's life is different, so everyone has a different like perspective and a different place that they're coming from when they sit down and listen to music. So yeah, obviously I think as an artist, when you're creating something, you're so close to it that it's really hard to be able to see it from any other angle than the angle you created it from, kind of, so to speak. So when other people write to you, for example, and they go, "Oh, I love to listen to this music before sleeping," or "This song makes me so happy," or "This is so uplifting," or "This makes me super angry or sad," it's like always a kind of an eye opener. Like, oh yeah, okay, I guess that can provoke like all kinds of different emotions, which is actually the biggest compliment, because I love when people can relate that much to what I do. I mean, that's kind of the end goal, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous saying: when you put out art, it immediately becomes theirs. And what's interesting is I've interviewed like a lot of bands that they sing about like partying and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll life, and like they've told me like they don't like to bring their personal lives into the music, because if they write something that could either be traumatic or something that is really hits home with them, and then other people interpret it in a way, it's gonna kind of be like, in a way, like a slap in the face to them, because they wanted to express a part of themselves. So like I was saying, why do you sing about partying and all this shallow stuff and whatever? They're like, because that's the easiest for everybody to sort of like, I guess the easiest for everybody to grasp onto at once and see the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely less confrontational, and also less confrontational with yourself, because I mean, going through like a process of writing, or writing, it can be a book, it could be painting, or whatever, like an art process in general. If you really go and dig deep, it can be, first of all, it can be super scary and super difficult to deal with that afterwards. Like if you make something that's been super personal and then you have to share it with other people afterwards, it's a very peculiar situation to be in. And then you say, like, if people don't interpret it the same way, I guess it can be hard to accept that you. I mean, maybe some people would feel it as like not a failure, but like, I don't know. It just, I can imagine that it would be very. Or I mean, when it's happened to me, I don't really think of it too much, but it's always a bit strange when you have people interpreting something that's so personal. That's true.
Yeah, and when you collaborate with other artists, I actually discovered you because of the work that you did with Alce,
Yeah.
and I loved the latest edition on a Spiritual Instinct. But when you're collaborating with Alce or Autumn's Dawn, is there maybe like less of a personal aspect into the music that you're collaborating with? Because do you maybe have to like adjust your style into what would fit theirs?
Well, for me, I mean, it also goes for the way that I see music in general, is that I don't really think of when you have a band project, I don't really think of the parts as separate things. I don't really care about like, oh, is this a really cool guitar part, or is that like drum beats like extra rad or whatever. It's more like the sum of everything that matters to me. So every time I'm working with another project that's not my personal project, I have to say, obviously, a project like Alcest is like so close to my heart. So even without saying anything, I just know kind of what's trying to be expressed. So it's obviously easier for me to work with people like that. But otherwise, I always try to think, what can I do to do justice to the song? What can I express that elevates the expression that was already there in the track? I never try to like really make it mine, because I don't think that's the point. The point is to serve the greater good, so to speak, like the full thing.
Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine that working with other artists can also open up new ideas to how to incorporate into your own work as well, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course. You it's really cool when you get an insight into the creative process of someone else, and you realize how many different ways you can do things and how they work, and that kind of their defaults versus your defaults, the things you always come back to. And it's so interesting, and I really love working with artists, especially like really different ones. At the moment I'm working with an electronic like synthwave artist from France, and it's so interesting to put vocals on something that's, yeah, it's just like miles apart from what I'm doing myself. So yeah, it's absolutely it opens your horizon, expands your horizon, is what I want to say.
Yeah, I think it's fair to assume, and is that no one artist has all the knowledge or all the talent at all. So like, there'll always be some sort of artist who will open your mind to things that you never knew that you liked or that you never knew you connected with, and then you could almost interpret that language into your own.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. It's so important in a field that's so abstract like art to stay humble. Like the moment you think you have the answers or that your way is the right way, it's just forget it. That's just you just miss the point. Like you said, we're always learning, and we have to be humble enough and grateful enough that we do cross people on our path that can lead us into complete new places that can be just so wonderful.
Yeah, and it seems like we talked about it before, but it almost seems like you take inspiration externally. Like you say, you see colors, working with other artists, but then you also have personal elements that you invest. So it seems like you take inspiration from both an internal and an external source.
Absolutely, yeah, that's true. I have a lot of impulses from the outside world. Like I said, like it can be, like you said, people, or it can be places. Nature is like a huge inspiration for me, but also the internal thing, or even externally. Even like it's really hard not to be inspired by when you see what's happening in society. All the things that just seem so wrong, and you're just wondering how can people be so cruel to each other, and it's hard not to let that seep into the music, so it becomes this like duality between the inside and the outside world.
Yeah, I don't like the term when people say that all art is political, but it's like you are a product of your time and you are a product of your environment. So like right now everybody's under quarantine. I would say that we're gonna have this is the ultimate time for creativity, and whether people are saying my art isn't political or it's not political, or I'm not looking at the outside world, it's like I think the outside world influences you whether you realize it or not.
Absolutely. I mean, as long as you're living in a society, you're going to be influenced by it. Even if it's like a direct or indirect thing, you are going to, like you say, be a product of your time. And that's what I realized too, especially for Adams, more so than the two first ones. I really drew inspiration from like how I think things are going in society, because it's just at some point you can't close your eyes anymore. It's too heavy, and it's too obvious that's not to be inspired by it.
Yeah, I've always said when your eyes are open, you're looking at society. When your eyes are closed, you're looking at your dreams. So in the end, there's inspiration coming whether you realize it or not for an artist, which almost sounds like a nightmare because you don't know where to start sometimes, but...
Yeah, that's quite beautiful. I like that saying. That's really, really, really on point.
Thank you. You ready for the most difficult question of the interview, if you have time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Bring it on.
How do you know when a song is done?
Oh my god, the worst question. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think you have some kind of like instinct, once again, like I said, for me, a big part of my writing process, at least for for the first one too, it's like for all my albums that I've written myself, basically is, you do your work, you work on the demos, you record stuff, then you get to a point where you need to like let them go a little bit, and you just like let it be, and you don't listen to them, you don't deal with them. And then I like to, after a period of that, take them out, and I walk around the city, like in Oslo or in Paris. I like to walk in the forest, and usually during those moments, that's when I really realize if a song has reached like its final form or not. And sometimes you don't actually even have the final form before you're in the studio, and it changes like until the very last minute. And sometimes you just have something and you go like, that's how it's supposed to be, and you just leave it alone, and it's like, this is just, that's how it's meant to be, and you just leave it.
Yeah.
So not really a good answer, but the answer is basically, it's really hard to know, but you kind of just have this like internal thing of, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. At least you didn't give me the answer when I submit the work to the label and they say it's done.
Oh no, that's probably the worst answer.
Yeah, it's so, and like they talk about the creative process so great, and then they answer with that. It's like the most anticlimactic answer ever.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of good that you mentioned that, because I think you let the songs speak for themselves. You don't want to put your art on life support, as I like to call it, where like you don't want to, eventually like you have to let them go. You have to let them speak for themselves in a way. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not always easy to let it go, and it's not always easy to let them go into the world when you're really done, because you're always like thinking, I could have changed the bridge, or like added some more there, or like another guitar. But at some point you just have to be objective enough with something that's so personal to say, okay, this is what is happening, and that's it.
Yeah, I've always said that artists should make a series of albums where they have the same song played like 10 times, and then they like do something different with each of them, and then see if the listener notices it.
That would be really interesting, and I think I already know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Uh, and I have two more questions for you. But when it comes to playing the material live, you obviously have an audience in front of you, and you're playing in a room that's maybe not your original atmosphere from when you're at home in your recording space. But is there maybe a similar energy that could that ties the creative process into your live presence, or is playing live a completely separate art from creating music?
I think the being on stage is like a completely extrovert version of the creative process. So I think basically it's a bit like opposites for me, which is why I always found the times that was forced to like stop my recording session and go play a show, which was very difficult to switch between the two because they're really different beasts for me. So what I love about the live shows is I really love the energy from the audience because it really brings a whole nother level, another layer to the tracks, and the energy becomes much more powerful on stage. So yeah, I would say, at least for me, maybe for other people it's different. For me, it's like two different worlds, and it's sometimes hard to balance the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd imagine that, like, especially if you have to do it within in the middle of a recording session, that almost has to be like such a block in a way. It almost has to like be an interruption sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're like in this very personal, like little cave of creation and whatnot, and then you have to go out in front of people, and you're like, no, I'm not ready to see the day of light.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be a bit challenging. Though I know there's some artists that like to write when they're like on the road and stuff like that, but I haven't really found a balance between those two yet. So it's either one or the other kind of thing.
Yeah, never say never, though.
Never say never.
Yeah. And the final question I wanted to ask you is that I know that for the age of quarantine that we're living in, you're actually doing these metal yoga sessions, which I think is absolutely awesome. Is there maybe like a similar? This might be another silly question, but like, is there maybe like a similar performance aspect behind yoga as you do when you're playing music? Because I know a lot of musicians who actually do yoga sometimes before they go on stage because it's such a release and it's such a relieving feeling. Is there maybe some sort of element that ties in music and yoga together?
Well, I mean, that's when my label Season the Mist approached me to do this like metal yoga series. I thought it was a cool idea because that's actually why I got into yoga like 3 years ago now, was because I realized that I need something on tour to both energize and also like stretch out and like soften my body, because obviously on tour you're either waiting for like hours or driving for hours, sitting on your butt doing nothing, or you're like loading in, loading out, carrying all kinds of heavy shit, or you're on stage where it's like you have this tension created and stuff. So it's cool to have something every day that kind of mellows you out but at the same time strengthens you. So for me, because of that, there was a total natural link between being a musician and doing yoga, because I think it's something that's very beneficial to people, any person, but especially people in the scene. So it was really, really natural for me when I was approached to do it. I thought that would be a really cool idea, and obviously when I'm doing the classes, there is can you call it a performance aspect to it? I guess you can call it that, because you are like teaching in front of people and you have an audience there too. But obviously I think with yoga it's more about connecting in a different way than with music, but actually a little bit the same way too, because you're opening up something very personal and it's something that's very you and very deep. So I think there's actually a lot of connections between the two things.
Yeah, and I think people can walk away from it the same way that they finish walking away if they're listening to your album. They could feel a release or a sense of liberation behind it as well.
Yeah, that's what I hope for anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, so and there's actually a metal yoga scene here in New York City. It's obviously not happening now, but like there's like a black metal yoga at this metal bar that I go to all the time, like satanic yoga. It's actually a sight to see.
Wow, I would love to see that. Like, that would be super funny to see.
Yeah, I went for journalism purposes one time, so I'm just sitting there. Like, I wasn't participating. I was just standing in the corner, like, taking notes. And it was so awkward. Like, people are, like, looking at me like, what is this guy doing here? I'm like, sorry, I'm a journalist. I'm not taking pictures.
Exactly. I'm going to put this on Instagram afterwards.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything that you else you would like to promote? Like when could can we be expecting some more online yoga sessions, or can we be expecting some new Sylvain?
Yeah, absolutely. I've decided to continue these yoga sessions for a little while because I think with people being in quarantine, it's like now I really wanted to try to give something to people with the little means that I have. I wanted to give people a little bit of light where they were. So I will continue the yoga sessions at least until June, I think. So every Saturday at 7 or 6 p.m. CET, I'm doing the yoga sessions. I'm also working on the fourth album, which is coming along nicely. So we will see with the situation the way it is now. It's not really easy to make plans for the future, but I was hoping to release it late next year, record it early next year. So hopefully it will be something that will be coming out next year. Otherwise, I also have another project that I was thinking of doing in the next few months because I've been asked a lot about, because I'm also kind of like a vocal coach. So I was thinking of recording some tutorials related to some of my songs for that, which would be coming out in the next few months.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and kind of going back to what you said, it's not the best time to make plans, but it is the best time to make art. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true.
Yeah, but thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Sylvaine. Be sure to pick up Adam's Align Coming Undone if you haven't already. New stuff coming very soon. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.